Sarah Martinez had always been invisible at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Coronado. For 3 years, she worked as a range safety officer and target technician, maintaining the equipment that elite warriors used to hone their deadly skills. At 26, she was one of only a handful of women working directly with the training ranges, and most days felt like she was swimming upstream against a current of skepticism and dismissal. The morning fog was just beginning to lift from the Pacific as Sarah made her rounds through Range Charlie, checking target systems and replacing worn shooting targets. She moved with practiced efficiency, her small frame allowing her to navigate the mechanical target systems with ease. The range was quiet except for the distant sound of surf, and the mechanical whir of the automated target carriers. Sarah had grown up in East Los Angeles, the daughter of a mechanic and a nurse. Money had always been tight, but her parents had instilled in her a fierce work ethic and an unshakable belief that she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. When other kids were playing video games, Sarah was in the garage with her father, learning to rebuild engines and fix complex machinery. Her hands were small but incredibly steady, and she had an intuitive understanding of how mechanical systems worked. The path to Coronado hadn't been straightforward. After high school, she joined the Navy as an electronics technician, specializing in weapons systems. 4 years of active duty had taught her discipline, attention to detail, and how to work in male-dominated environments. When her enlistment ended, the civilian contractor position at the Special Warfare Facility had seemed like a perfect fit. The pay was decent, the work was technical and challenging, and she got to support some of the most elite soldiers in the world. But respect had been harder to earn than she'd anticipated. Many of the instructors and support staff treated her like she was playing dress-up in a man's world. They weren't openly hostile, but there was a constant undercurrent of doubt about her capabilities. Comments about how she was too small for the heavy equipment, how maybe she'd be better suited for office work, how the ranges were no place for someone like her. Sarah had learned to ignore the whispers and prove herself through her work. The target systems at Range Charlie were state-of-the-art, computer-controlled mechanisms that could simulate various combat scenarios. Sarah knew every wire, every sensor, every moving part. She'd spent countless hours studying the technical manuals, often staying late to troubleshoot problems that the day shift couldn't solve. Her supervisor, Chief Petty Officer Jenkins, had grudgingly admitted that she was probably the best technician they'd had in years, though he'd never said it where anyone else could hear. As Sarah replaced a damaged target at the 300-yard line, she heard the rumble of vehicles approaching the range complex. Through the morning haze, she could see a convoy of black SUVs and military vehicles heading toward the main range building. This wasn't unusual, various special operations units regularly used the facility for training, but something about this particular group caught her attention. The vehicles moved with a precision and urgency that suggested this wasn't routine training. She continued her work, methodically checking each target system and making notes on her maintenance checklist. The targets had taken a beating during yesterday's training exercise. Some showed the tight groupings of expert marksmen, while others bore the scattered impacts of students still learning their craft. Each hole told a story of triumph or frustration, success or failure measured in fractions of inches. The sound of footsteps on the range walkway made her look up. A group of men in desert camouflage were approaching, led by a tall figure she recognized as Commander Peterson, the facility's training director. Behind him walked 6 men who moved with the fluid, confident grace that marked them as something special. Even in their casual approach, Sarah could see the controlled alertness that separated elite operators from regular military personnel. "Range is cold and clear, sir," Sarah called out, using the standard safety protocol. She began collecting her tools, assuming the group would want to begin their training session. Commander Peterson nodded toward her. "Martinez, these gentlemen are from SEAL Team 6. They'll be using Charlie Range for some specialized training over the next few days. Make sure all systems are functioning at 100%. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with professional pride. SEAL Team 6 was the most elite of the elite, the unit that handled the military's most sensitive and dangerous missions. Having them train on equipment she maintained was both an honor and a significant responsibility. Any malfunction or problem would reflect directly on her competence. "All systems are operational and calibrated, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I've just finished the morning inspection. Target carriers are responding normally, and all electronic systems show green across the board." One of the SEALs, a compact man with intelligent eyes and graying temples, stepped forward. Sarah noticed he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had seen and survived more than most people could imagine. His gear was worn but meticulously maintained, and, when he looked at her, she felt like he was actually seeing her, not looking through her the way many people did. "You maintain all this equipment yourself?" he asked, gesturing toward the sophisticated target systems. "Yes, sir. I handle maintenance and repair for this range and 2 others. Been doing it for 3 years now." The SEAL nodded thoughtfully. "Impressive setup. These systems are more advanced than what we had at our last training site. You know the technical specs on the target carriers? Response time, programming capabilities?" Sarah found herself surprised by his genuine interest. Most people treated her like a glorified maintenance worker, someone who replaced broken parts but didn't really understand the systems she worked on. This man was asking technical questions that demonstrated his own understanding of the equipment. "Target carriers have a response time of 0.8 seconds from command to initiation of movement," she replied, warming to the subject. "They can be programmed for random appearance patterns, lateral movement up to 15 miles per hour, and elevation changes of up to 45 degrees. The impact sensors can register hits within a 2-inch accuracy radius and transmit data in real time to the range control system." The SEAL's eyebrows raised slightly. "You know this equipment better than most armament officers I've worked with." Before Sarah could respond, Commander Peterson interrupted. "Martinez, why don't you give them a quick demonstration of the target systems, then clear the range so they can begin their training?" Sarah moved to the range control panel, her fingers dancing across the digital interface with practiced ease. She activated a complex sequence that sent targets popping up and down at various distances, some moving laterally across the range, others appearing for only brief seconds before disappearing. The demonstration showcased the system's full capabilities, from simple stationary targets to complex scenarios that would challenge even the most skilled marksman. "As you can see, the system can simulate a wide variety of engagement scenarios," Sarah explained, her professional confidence overriding her usual nervousness around high-ranking personnel. "We can program specific sequences to match mission parameters, adjust timing for different skill levels, and even incorporate environmental variables like simulated wind effects on the scoring system." When the demonstration ended, the SEALs exchanged glances. Sarah caught a few murmured comments that sounded appreciative, though she couldn't make out the specific words. The gray-haired SEAL who had asked the question stepped closer to the control panel. "This is exactly what we need for the training evolution we have planned," he said to Commander Peterson. Then, turning to Sarah, he asked, "Will you be available if we run into any technical issues with the equipment?" "I'm scheduled to be here for the next 4 days, sir. Range maintenance is my primary responsibility." "Good. I have a feeling we're going to push these systems pretty hard." As Sarah gathered her tools and prepared to leave the range to the SEALs, she felt a mixture of pride and curiosity. She'd worked with many elite units over the years, but there was something different about this group. They moved and spoke with the confidence of men who had faced impossible odds and prevailed. Whatever training they had planned, she sensed it would be unlike anything she'd seen before. The fog was completely gone now, revealing a crystal-clear California morning. As Sarah walked back toward the maintenance building, she could hear the SEALs discussing their training plan in low, serious voices. She caught fragments of conversation about unconventional scenarios and stress inoculation, terms that suggested their upcoming exercises would be far more complex than standard marksmanship training. She had no way of knowing that in just a few hours, her routine day of equipment maintenance would transform into something that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her own capabilities and her place in the world of elite military operations. The morning had started like hundreds of others, but, by evening, Sarah Martinez would discover that sometimes the most extraordinary opportunities come disguised as ordinary moments, and that being invisible might have been preparing her for something far more significant than she'd ever imagined. The sound of the first gunshots echoed across the range as Sarah reached the maintenance building, marking the beginning of what would prove to be the most transformative week of her life. 2 hours into the SEAL training session, Sarah was calibrating equipment at Range Delta when her radio crackled to life. The voice belonged to Chief Jenkins, and there was an edge of frustration in his tone that immediately caught her attention. "Martinez, get back to Charlie Range. We've got a technical malfunction that's shutting down the whole training evolution." Sarah dropped her tools into her kit bag and jogged the quarter-mile back to Range Charlie. As she approached, she could see the SEALs standing in a loose circle around the main control console. Their body language spoke of barely contained impatience. Elite operators lived by precise schedules, and equipment failures could derail carefully planned training scenarios that had taken weeks to coordinate. The gray-haired SEAL she'd spoken with earlier, she'd overheard someone call him Senior Chief Morrison, spotted her approaching and walked over to meet her. His expression was serious but not hostile, the look of a professional dealing with a problem that needed solving. "We've got a system failure that started about 20 minutes ago," he explained as they walked toward the control panel. "Targets started appearing in random sequences that don't match our programmed scenario. Then, the lateral movement systems began stuttering, and now 3 of the target carriers are stuck in the down position." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Equipment failures during VIP training sessions were every technician's nightmare. Not only did they disrupt important military training, but they also reflected directly on her professional competence. She'd spent 3 years building a reputation for reliability, and one major malfunction could undermine all of that hard work. At the control console, she quickly accessed the system diagnostics. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, and she began tracing through the operational parameters with practiced efficiency. The other SEALs watched silently as she worked, and Sarah was acutely aware of their scrutiny. These were men accustomed to equipment that functioned flawlessly under the most extreme conditions. They had little patience for technical failures and even less for technicians who couldn't solve them quickly. "There," Sarah said after several minutes of analysis. "The problem's in the primary control algorithm. Looks like a cascade failure triggered by a timing conflict between the random sequence generator and the manual override protocols." Senior Chief Morrison moved closer to the screen. "Can you fix it?" "Yes, sir, but it's going to require some creative programming. The standard repair protocol would take about 4 hours and require shutting down the entire range system for recalibration." "We don't have 4 hours. This training window can't be extended." Sarah chewed her lower lip, thinking through the alternatives. She'd encountered similar problems before, but never under this kind of pressure. There was a workaround she'd developed during late-night troubleshooting sessions, a way to bypass the corrupted algorithms and manually control the target systems in real time. It was more complex than the automated systems, requiring constant attention and quick reflexes, but it would allow the training to continue. "I can run the systems manually," she offered. "It means I'll have to stay at the console and control each target sequence by hand, but we can maintain full functionality without shutting down for repairs." Morrison's eyes sharpened with interest. "You can match the complexity of our training scenario manually? We're talking about multiple moving targets, precise timing sequences, and split-second coordination." "I've been working with these systems for 3 years, sir. I know their capabilities better than anyone." The senior chief turned to confer briefly with his team members. Sarah caught fragments of their conversation, mentions of schedule constraints, training objectives, and risk assessment. When Morrison turned back to her, his expression had shifted to something approaching respect. "All right, Martinez. Show us what you can do." What followed was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The SEAL training scenario was a complex evolution designed to simulate a hostage rescue mission in an urban environment. Multiple targets needed to appear and disappear with precise timing, representing both hostiles and non-combatants. The target carriers had to move in coordinated patterns that would challenge the operator's ability to engage threats while avoiding civilian casualties. Sarah's hands flew across the control interface, orchestrating the mechanical ballet with intense concentration. She watched the SEALs through the range observation windows, anticipating their movements and adjusting target presentations to match the training scenario's requirements. When Senior Chief Morrison advanced on a building mock-up, she triggered a sequence of hostile targets that appeared at windows and doorways with realistic timing. When another SEAL moved to clear a room, she presented him with split-second decisions between armed enemies and innocent civilians. The level of skill required was extraordinary. Sarah had to process visual information about the SEALs' positions, understand their tactical intentions, and coordinate multiple mechanical systems simultaneously. It was like conducting an orchestra where every note had to be perfect and every timing cue had to be precise. One mistake could ruin the training value of the entire scenario or, worse, create a safety hazard. But Sarah found herself rising to the challenge in ways she'd never expected. Her years of working with the equipment had given her an intuitive understanding of its capabilities, while her background in electronics provided the technical foundation she needed to improvise solutions on the fly. More than that, she discovered she had a natural ability to read the tactical situation and anticipate what the operators needed next. Contact left, second story window, she heard through the radio as one of the SEALs engaged a target she'd positioned. The satisfaction in his voice told her she'd gotten the timing exactly right. As the scenario progressed, Sarah began to understand the training's objectives more clearly. This wasn't just marksmanship practice, it was a complex test of decision-making under extreme pressure. The SEALs had to identify threats, protect innocent civilians, and coordinate their actions with split-second precision. Her role wasn't just technical support, she was creating the psychological pressure that would prepare these men for real-world missions where lives hung in the balance. 20 minutes into the scenario, something unexpected happened. One of the SEALs, a compact, dark-haired operator she'd heard called Rodriguez, approached her position during a pause in the action. Instead of the usual brief acknowledgement she received from training participants, he stopped directly in front of the control console. "That was perfect timing on the window target," he said, his voice carrying genuine appreciation. "You read the tactical situation exactly right. How did you know I was setting up for that angle of approach?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Throughout her career, she'd received acknowledgement for technical competence, but never for tactical understanding. "I watched the training exercises, sir. After 3 years, you start to recognize movement patterns and tactical techniques." Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "You've got good situational awareness. Better than some operators I've worked with." The comment sent a jolt of pride through Sarah's chest. Coming from a SEAL, that kind of praise was extraordinary. But, before she could respond, the radio crackled with Morrison's voice calling for the next phase of the training to begin. For the next hour, Sarah orchestrated increasingly complex scenarios. Each evolution pushed both the equipment and her own capabilities further than they'd ever been tested. She coordinated target presentations for multi-room clearing exercises, timed explosive breach simulations, and created stress-inducing scenarios where the margin for error was virtually zero. The SEAL's performance was flawless, but Sarah began to notice something else. They were starting to communicate with her directly, calling out requests for specific target configurations and timing adjustments. Instead of treating her as invisible technical support, they were incorporating her into their tactical planning. Morrison would key his radio and ask for civilian pop-ups at the 15-second mark, or Rodriguez would request multiple hostiles, random appearance pattern, north side of the building. It was a level of integration and trust that Sarah had never experienced. For the first time in her career, she felt like she was truly part of a team rather than just support personnel who happened to be necessary for the mission. As the afternoon training session wound down, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed. The equipment malfunction that had threatened to derail the entire exercise had instead created an opportunity for her to demonstrate capabilities she hadn't even known she possessed. She'd moved beyond simply maintaining equipment to actively participating in the training evolution, and the SEALs had recognized and valued her contribution. Senior Chief Morrison approached the control console as the last targets disappeared into their storage positions. His expression was thoughtful, and Sarah could sense he was processing something more complex than a simple training assessment. "That was exceptional work, Martinez," he said, and his tone carried a weight that suggested this was more than routine appreciation. "I've never seen anyone coordinate target systems with that level of precision and tactical understanding." "Thank you, sir. I'm glad the training objectives were met." Morrison studied her for a long moment, and Sarah had the uncomfortable sensation of being evaluated for something she didn't understand. "Tell me something. Have you ever considered that your skills might be applicable to things beyond equipment maintenance?" The question caught Sarah completely off guard. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir. I mean that what you did today required more than technical knowledge. You demonstrated tactical awareness, split-second decision-making under pressure, and the ability to coordinate complex operations in real time. Those are rare skills, and they're not limited to running target systems." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Morrison's radio crackled with a message that caused his expression to become suddenly grave. Sarah couldn't make out the details, but she caught fragments about immediate deployment and mission parameters changed. Morrison keyed his radio to acknowledge the message, then turned back to Sarah with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Martinez, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. How do you feel about the possibility that your skills might be needed for something more than training support?" Sarah felt the world shift slightly around her. Something in Morrison's tone suggested that this wasn't a hypothetical question, and that her answer might have consequences she couldn't yet understand. The afternoon had already taken her far beyond the routine equipment maintenance that had defined her career, but now it seemed like it might be leading somewhere even more unexpected. "I'm not sure I understand what you're asking, sir." Morrison glanced toward his team members, who were gathering their gear with the practiced efficiency of men preparing for immediate action. When he looked back at Sarah, his eyes held a mixture of urgency and something that might have been hope. "Sometimes the best person for a job isn't the one you'd expect," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's the person who's been right there all along, doing their work so well that everyone took them for granted." The cryptic comment left Sarah with more questions than answers, but before she could respond, Morrison was already walking away to rejoin his team. As she watched the SEALs prepare to leave the range, Sarah had the distinct feeling that the afternoon's events were far from over, and that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Sarah was locking up the range control systems when Senior Chief Morrison reappeared, this time accompanied by a woman in navy dress blues who carried herself with unmistakable command presence. The woman was tall, with steel-gray hair and the kind of bearing that suggested she was accustomed to making decisions that affected lives and nations. "Martinez, this is Commander Sarah Chen, Naval Special Warfare Command," Morrison said without preamble. "She needs to speak with you immediately." Commander Chen stepped forward, and Sarah found herself under the scrutiny of sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "Petty Officer Martinez, Senior Chief Morrison has given me a very interesting report about your performance this afternoon. I understand you successfully coordinated a complex training evolution under circumstances that would have challenged experienced operators." Sarah felt a flutter of uncertainty. The commander's tone was professional but carried an undercurrent that suggested this conversation was more significant than a routine performance review. "I just did my job, ma'am. The equipment malfunctioned, and I found a workaround to keep the training on schedule." "It was considerably more than that," Chen replied. "According to the team's assessment, you demonstrated tactical awareness, real-time decision-making, and operational coordination skills that are exceptionally rare. More importantly, you did it under pressure, with no preparation time, and with perfect precision." The commander paused, studying Sarah with the intensity of someone making a critical evaluation. "I'm going to share something with you that's classified, and I need your word that this conversation doesn't leave this room." Sarah nodded, feeling as though she was stepping across a threshold she couldn't see. "You have my word, ma'am. 3 hours ago, we received intelligence about a situation that requires immediate response. A group of American contractors has been taken hostage at an industrial facility in Southeast Asia. The facility is heavily fortified, with multiple buildings, complex sightlines, and significant civilian presence in the surrounding area." Chen activated a tablet and showed Sarah satellite images of the target location. The facility was sprawling and intricate, with numerous buildings connected by walkways and surrounded by urban development. Sarah could see immediately why it would present extraordinary challenges for a rescue operation. "The hostiles have established defensive positions throughout the complex," Chen continued. "They placed hostages in multiple locations, mixed civilian workers with the American prisoners, and created a scenario where any rescue attempt will require split-second decisions about target identification and engagement protocols." Sarah studied the images, her mind automatically analyzing sightlines, approach routes, and tactical considerations. 3 years of watching SEAL training had given her an educated understanding of how such operations unfolded, and she could see the complexity of the challenge immediately. "The problem," Morrison interjected, "is coordination. The team will be operating in multiple buildings simultaneously, with limited communication and constant time pressure. They need someone who can coordinate their movements, track their positions, and provide real-time intelligence about target locations and civilian movements." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she began to understand where this conversation was leading. "You're talking about tactical coordination from a remote position." "Exactly," Chen confirmed. "We have access to real-time satellite feeds, thermal imaging, and electronic surveillance of the facility. What we need is someone who can process that information and provide actionable intelligence to the team on the ground. Someone who understands tactical operations, can make split-second decisions under extreme pressure, and has demonstrated the ability to coordinate complex scenarios in real time." The magnitude of what they were suggesting hit Sarah like a physical blow. They weren't talking about equipment maintenance or training support. They were asking her to help coordinate an actual military operation, one where American lives hung in the balance and where her decisions could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. "Ma'am, I appreciate the confidence you're showing in me, but I'm a technician, not an operator. I maintain equipment and run training systems. This is completely outside my area of expertise." Commander Chen's expression didn't change. "This afternoon, you coordinated a 6-man SEAL team through a complex training evolution with perfect precision, under circumstances that would have challenged experienced tactical coordinators. You read their movements, anticipated their needs, and made split-second decisions that enhanced their performance. The only difference between what you did today and what we're asking you to do now is that today was training and tomorrow will be real." Morrison stepped closer, his voice taking on an urgent tone. "Sarah, we've worked with professional tactical coordinators who couldn't have done what you did this afternoon. You have a natural understanding of how operators move and think. More than that, you have the technical skills to manage multiple information streams simultaneously and the situational awareness to make good decisions under pressure." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what they were proposing. "But this is a real mission. People's lives depend on getting it right. What if I make a mistake? What if I miss something crucial? What if you don't, and that makes the difference?" Chen countered. "Sarah, we're not asking you to do anything you haven't already proven you can do. We're just asking you to do it when it matters most." The commander activated another screen on her tablet, showing detailed floor plans of the target facility. "The mission launches in 18 hours. The team will insert at multiple points and move through the facility systematically. Your job would be to monitor their progress through satellite feeds and electronic surveillance, track the locations of hostages and hostiles, and provide real-time guidance about threats and opportunities." Sarah studied the plans, her mind racing through the tactical implications. She could see how the operation would unfold, visualize the team's likely approach routes, and identify the critical decision points where accurate intelligence would be essential. Despite her fear and uncertainty, she found herself analyzing the scenario with the same intensity she'd brought to the training exercises. "The facility has 17 buildings connected by covered walkways," she said, almost without thinking. "Multiple entry points, but limited escape routes for the hostiles. They'll probably try to move hostages during the operation to use them as shields or bargaining chips." Morrison and Chen exchanged glances. "Exactly the kind of analysis we need," Morrison said. "You see the tactical picture instinctively. But seeing it and acting on it under real-world pressure are completely different things," Sarah protested. "In training, if I make a mistake, the worst thing that happens is someone misses a target or the scenario gets disrupted. In a real operation, people die." Commander Chen's expression softened slightly. "Sarah, I've been in special operations for 15 years. I've planned and executed dozens of missions, and I can tell you that the difference between success and failure usually comes down to having the right person in the right position at the critical moment. This afternoon, you demonstrated that you might be the right person for this mission." The weight of the decision pressed down on Sarah like a physical force. Everything in her background and training told her this was beyond her capabilities, that she should decline respectfully and return to the comfortable predictability of equipment maintenance. But another part of her, the part that had risen to meet the challenge of the training malfunction, was already calculating how she could contribute to a successful mission. "What would my exact responsibilities be?" she asked, and immediately realized that by asking the question, she was already moving toward acceptance. "You'd be positioned in the Tactical Operations Center with access to all intelligence feeds," Chen explained. "Your job would be to monitor the team's progress, analyze the information coming in from various sources, and provide guidance when they need it. Think of it as running the most important training exercise of your life, except the targets will be shooting back." Morrison leaned forward. "Sarah, the team trusts you. After what happened this afternoon, they specifically requested that you be part of the mission coordination. In their world, that kind of trust isn't given lightly." The mention of the team's trust hit Sarah harder than any of the other arguments. Professional soldiers who had spent years perfecting their craft had watched her work and decided she was someone they wanted supporting them in a life-or-death situation. That level of confidence was both humbling and terrifying. "How much time do I have to decide?" "We need an answer in the next hour," Chen replied. "The mission briefing begins at 0600 tomorrow, and if you're going to be part of the coordination team, you need to be fully integrated into the planning process from the beginning. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to process the magnitude of the choice she faced. 12 hours ago, her biggest concern had been replacing worn target systems. Now she was being asked to help coordinate a mission that could determine whether American hostages lived or died. The rational part of her mind screamed that she was completely unqualified for such responsibility. But another voice, quieter but more insistent, reminded her of the afternoon's events. She had risen to meet a challenge that should have been beyond her capabilities. She had earned the trust and respect of some of the military's most elite operators. And now they were asking her to use those same skills when the stakes were highest. "If I say yes," Sarah said slowly, "and if something goes wrong because of a decision I make or fail to make, how do I live with that?" Commander Chen's expression became grave. "The same way we all do in this business, Sarah. By understanding that sometimes the choice isn't between success and failure, but between trying your best and doing nothing. Those hostages are going to live or die based on decisions made by the people willing to take responsibility for their lives. The question is whether you're willing to be one of those people." Sarah opened her eyes and looked at the satellite images again. Somewhere in those buildings were Americans whose only hope for survival lay in the skills and courage of a small team of operators and the people supporting them. The magnitude of that responsibility was overwhelming, but so was the possibility that she might be able to make a difference when it mattered most. "I need to make some phone calls," she said quietly. "Personal arrangements. If I'm going to do this, there are people who need to know I might be unavailable for a while." Morrison smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "Does that mean you're in?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling as though she was jumping off a cliff into darkness, trusting that her skills and instincts would see her through. "Yes, sir. I'm in." The transformation from invisible technician to operational coordinator wouldn't be complete until the mission began, but, in that moment, Sarah Martinez crossed a line that would change her life forever. The girl from East Los Angeles who had learned to fix engines in her father's garage was about to help some of the world's most elite warriors save American lives in a place most people couldn't find on a map. As Commander Chen began outlining the mission timeline and briefing schedule, Sarah realized that her years of quiet competence and invisible expertise had been preparing her for this moment all along. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by people who never expected to be warriors, and sometimes the most crucial victories come from those who simply refuse to let others down when the stakes are highest. The Tactical Operations Center hummed with controlled energy at 0430 hours as Sarah took her position at the Intelligence Coordination Station. Banks of monitors surrounded her, displaying satellite feeds, thermal imaging, communication intercepts, and real-time data from a dozen different sources. After 6 hours of intensive briefings and system familiarization, she felt as prepared as someone could be for coordinating their first live combat operation. Senior Chief Morrison's voice crackled through her headset as the team completed their final equipment checks at the insertion point, 3 miles from the target facility. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team. Radio check." Sarah keyed her microphone, using the call sign she'd been assigned for the mission. "Alpha Team, this is Overwatch. I have clear comms and full situational display. All intelligence feeds are active and tracking." Commander Chen stood behind Sarah's station, monitoring the feeds and ready to provide guidance if needed. The mission had been planned with military precision, but everyone understood that no plan survived contact with the enemy. Sarah's role was to adapt to changing circumstances and provide the team with information they couldn't obtain from their ground-level perspective. Through the satellite feed, Sarah watched the 6-man team move through the pre-dawn darkness toward the industrial facility. They moved like shadows, their night vision equipment allowing them to navigate terrain that would have been impassable for normal personnel. Even through the electronic surveillance systems, their professional competence was unmistakable. The target facility sprawled across several acres, a complex of concrete and steel buildings connected by walkways and surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. Intelligence reports indicated that 14 American contractors were being held in 3 different locations within the complex, while an unknown number of local workers were also being used as human shields by the hostage-takers. "Alpha Team, be advised that thermal imaging shows 15 heat signatures in Building 3, West Side, 2nd floor," Sarah transmitted as she analyzed the infrared displays. "Based on movement patterns, that appears to be the largest concentration of hostages." "Copy, Overwatch. We see the thermal blooms. Any indication of hostile positions in that area?" Sarah switched between multiple camera angles and sensor feeds, building a 3-dimensional picture of the facility in her mind. Negative on static positions, but I'm tracking mobile contacts on the ground floor of Building 3. Two individuals moving in patrol patterns, armed based on the thermal signatures of their equipment. This was it, the moment when her months of training exercises became life-or-death reality. The information Sarah provided would determine how the team approached their objectives, which routes they took, and how they prioritized their targets. Every decision she made could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Morrison's team split into 3 two-man elements, each tasked with securing one of the buildings where hostages were being held. Sarah's job was to coordinate their movements and provide early warning about threats they couldn't see from their ground-level positions. Alpha 1, you have 2 hostiles approaching your position from the north, Sarah transmitted, watching thermal signatures converge on Morrison and Rodriguez's location. Range approximately 50 meters, moving along the fence line. Copy, Overwatch. We see them. Through her monitors, Sarah watched Morrison and Rodriguez melt into the shadows beside a maintenance building. The patrol passed within 10 feet of their position without detecting them, a testament to the SEAL's professional skill and Sarah's accurate intelligence about enemy movements. The first 30 minutes of the operation unfolded with textbook precision. Alpha Team moved through the facility perimeter, neutralized isolated sentries, and positioned themselves for simultaneous assaults on all 3 target buildings. Sarah coordinated their movements like a conductor guiding an orchestra, using her overview of the facility to ensure they avoided detection while maintaining their timeline. Then, everything changed. Overwatch, this is Alpha 3, came the urgent voice of Petty Officer Williams from the Eastern Building. We've got a problem. Hostiles are moving prisoners from Building 1 toward Building 2. Looks like they detected something and they're consolidating. Sarah's screen suddenly showed a flurry of thermal activity as armed figures began herding groups of captives between buildings. The carefully planned mission was dissolving into chaos as the enemy adapted to circumstances they couldn't have anticipated. Alpha Team, this is Overwatch, Sarah transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. I'm tracking multiple hostile movements. They're consolidating hostages in Building 2, but I count at least 6 armed individuals setting up defensive positions in Buildings 1 and 3. Morrison's voice cut through the radio chatter with command authority. Overwatch, we need options. Can you give us a tactical assessment? This was the moment Sarah had feared, when the operation deviated from the plan and success depended on her ability to analyze a fluid situation and provide actionable intelligence. She studied her displays, processing information streams that would have overwhelmed her just hours earlier, looking for patterns and opportunities that trained operators on the ground couldn't see. Alpha Team, I'm seeing an opportunity, she said, her mind racing through tactical possibilities. Building 2 has a thermal signature indicating approximately 25 people, but the hostile movement patterns suggest they're using the ground floor for defensive positions while keeping hostages on the second floor. If Alpha 1 can create a distraction at Building 3, Alpha 2 and 3 can assault Building 2 while the hostiles are focused elsewhere. There was a brief pause before Morrison responded. Overwatch, that's solid tactical analysis. Alpha 1 moving to execute diversion. Alpha 2 and 3 prepare for coordinated assault on Building 2. What followed was the longest 10 minutes of Sarah's life. She watched through multiple camera angles as Morrison and Rodriguez engaged hostile positions at Building 3, drawing enemy attention and fire away from the main assault. Meanwhile, the other 4 team members moved through Building 2 with devastating efficiency, systematically clearing rooms and securing hostages. Sarah's role evolved from passive observation to active coordination. She guided the assault team around hostile positions, warned them about civilians in their path, and provided real-time updates about enemy reinforcements moving through the facility. Her fingers flew across multiple keyboards as she switched between camera feeds, analyzed thermal data, and coordinated with off-site intelligence assets. Alpha 2, you've got hostile movement on your 6. 3 individuals coming up the stairwell behind you. Copy, Overwatch. We're ready for them. Alpha 3, civilian movement in Room 7. Multiple heat signatures, non-hostile based on movement patterns. Roger. Moving to secure civilians. The precision required was extraordinary. Sarah had to process visual information from dozens of sources, distinguish between hostages and hostiles based on thermal signatures and movement patterns, and provide guidance that kept the assault team ahead of enemy reactions. One mistake in target identification could result in civilian casualties or friendly fire incidents. 23 minutes after the assault began, Morrison's voice crackled through the radio with the words everyone had been hoping to hear: "Overwatch, this is Alpha 1. All hostages secured. Facility is clear. Initiating extraction protocol." Sarah slumped back in her chair, suddenly aware that she had been holding her breath for the better part of the operation. Around her, the Tactical Operations Center erupted in controlled celebration as personnel acknowledged mission success. 14 American contractors and 8 local workers had been rescued without casualties, while the hostile force had been neutralized with surgical precision. Commander Chen placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Outstanding work, Martinez." That tactical assessment about the diversion was exactly what the team needed to adapt to changing circumstances. But Sarah's attention was focused on her radio as Morrison's voice came through one final time: "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team. Thanks for keeping us out of trouble. Outstanding coordination. We couldn't have done it without you." The acknowledgement from the team leader meant more to Sarah than any official commendation could. She had earned the respect of elite operators by performing under the most extreme pressure imaginable, proving that competence and courage could emerge from the most unexpected places. 3 hours later, as the rescued hostages were being evacuated and mission reports were being compiled, Senior Chief Morrison found Sarah in the debriefing room. She was still processing the magnitude of what had happened, struggling to reconcile her self-image as an invisible technician with the reality of what she had accomplished. "You know," Morrison said, settling into the chair beside her, "there's something I want to show you." He handed her his M4 rifle, the primary weapon that had seen him through countless missions in some of the world's most dangerous places. Sarah took the weapon with reverence, understanding the significance of the gesture. This wasn't just equipment, it was a symbol of trust and capability that few people ever had the privilege of holding. "3 years ago, you were just someone who maintained our training equipment," Morrison said quietly. "Today, you proved that sometimes the most capable person for a mission is someone who's been right there all along, doing their job so well that everyone took them for granted." Sarah looked down at the rifle in her hands, feeling its weight both physically and symbolically. "I never imagined that maintaining target systems would prepare me for something like this." "That's because you were thinking too small about what your skills really were," Morrison replied. "You weren't just maintaining equipment. You were developing tactical awareness, learning to read operational situations, and building the kind of steady competence under pressure that can't be taught in any classroom." Commander Chen appeared in the doorway, carrying a folder that Sarah suspected contained her future. "Martinez, I have some things we need to discuss. Based on your performance today, Naval Special Warfare Command is very interested in your potential for expanded responsibilities." As Sarah handed Morrison's rifle back to him, she realized that her life had changed irrevocably. The invisible technician who had started the week replacing training targets had become someone who could coordinate life-or-death operations with elite military units. The skills she'd thought were limited to equipment maintenance had proven applicable to challenges she'd never imagined facing. "You know what the most remarkable thing about today was?" Morrison asked as he secured his weapon. "It wasn't that you rose to meet an extraordinary challenge. It was that the challenge revealed capabilities you'd possessed all along. You just needed the right circumstances to discover them." Sarah thought about the young woman who had grown up in East Los Angeles, learning to fix engines in her father's garage and dreaming of a career where her technical skills would be valued. That woman could never have imagined sitting in a tactical operations center, coordinating special operations missions that would save American lives. But every experience, every challenge, every moment of quiet competence had been preparing her for this transformation. As she followed Commander Chen toward what would undoubtedly be discussions about her future role in special operations, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. Sometimes the most important discoveries about ourselves come not from seeking new horizons, but from recognizing that the skills and strengths we've been developing all along are more powerful and applicable than we ever dared to believe. The girl who had been invisible for so long had finally found a place where her unique combination of technical expertise, tactical awareness, and steady competence under pressure was not just valued, but essential. And, in saving others, she had discovered parts of herself she hadn't known existed, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with nothing more than a willingness to step forward when others step aside.